Either you need resources to scale, or you need resources to support the larger product development work. Once you start moving into the millions, couple of millions, 5, 10 millions of investments, you then surface into the mainstream. You're now right there, visible to everybody. And it is at that point that if you haven't been managing your stakeholders well, your idea can potentially die.
An innovation lab gets launched. There's a lot of excitement that builds around it, and people are talking about it, and it's got this buzz that we're doing this thing. And Bill over here, who used to be director of X, is now VP of innovation or something. And there's like this transformation. It feels very good. And then a few months go by, and it seems that excitement and things kind of die out. The organization kind of just moves on. And to your point about maybe it's a pet project or something, I've found, and I would love your opinion on that internal communication on how and what the progress is of the innovation lab to keep that buzz and excitement going for the organization. Is that something that you've experienced in the past?
Yeah, I mean, so when I'm working with innovation labs, my first question is, I don't actually care. Don't show me the products you're working on. Like I don't today. I don't care about that. That's always my first conversation with them. Right now, I care about your bridge to the main company. Show me your bridge to the main organization. How is the work that you're doing here connected to what's going on in the main organization? And a lot of the time when people are kind of given an innovation lab to work in, they think they've been given the license to work on whatever they want. Mm-hmm. And this is never true. And people have to embrace that this is never true. You really have to always have a bridge to the main organization, which means you have to be celebrating any wins that you're having. I mean, I've even advised some innovation labs to stop working on cool ideas. Say, okay, we're an innovation lab. We have a set of tools and techniques and tactics that we have that can really help the company. For the first year of our lab, we're going to only work on projects that help the main company. And then you go to leaders and you say, what is keeping you up at night? Give us a couple of those things and we can help you solve them quickly using these methodologies. Then they start to see the value of the methodologies, and that buys you license to start working on new things. And as you're working on those new things, you're still connecting them back to whoever can scale. I was once coaching an innovation lab that had like 12, 13 ideas that they'd been working on for a couple of years that nobody in the organization was willing to take to scale. Nobody. Like they couldn't get any buy-in, right? Mm-hmm. So it's so fundamentally important. And I think eventually they set up a rule that they will never work on a project that doesn't have a main organization champion connected to it, because they suddenly realize that they wouldn't be creating any value. They'd just be working on products that would never see the day of, the light of day.
The thing that I've experienced the most is just like what you're saying, is the focus on the work and the products and the ROI, but less of focus on the communication. Mm-hmm. And one thing you wrote, I really liked. You wrote, it's a battle for hearts and minds as part of this, as much as it is about actual innovation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete battle for hearts and minds. It's one of those, if a tree falls in the forest and it makes a sound and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound, right? If you work on a really cool product, but you don't have the savvy to ensure that your company takes that product to scale, are you an innovator?
It's a great question.
I mean, if your product never sees the day of light, are you an innovator? And it's a foundational question about practice, right? Because it's not just about making products. It's about also making sure that those products are able to launch. And if you're working in a startup, right, you have to deal with maybe 5 factors that are kind of important, customer need, scale, channels, figuring out whether or not that, whether the timing is right. If you're working in a large company, you have to figure out all of those other things, plus the alignment piece. Like the alignment with the main organization is a core part of innovating in a large organization. And this is something that innovators tend to actually ignore.
It's not uncommon, right? It's Well, we want to take a startup approach, and I've heard you talk about the difference between maybe a multi-billion-dollar organization and a startup is that a startup, all their competitors are outside of the startup, right? Versus a corporation, right? Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's interesting because that's a quote from Jeffrey Moore where he says, like, in a large company. He says, when you're a startup, all your enemies are outside the startup. If you're a large company, you got enemies outside and inside. Right?
But we don't want to believe that, right, Tendayi? Right? We want to. These are all our friends. They're here to help us, right?
No way, they're not. They're and what's interesting about that is, you can imagine a whole bunch of nightmare scenarios that have played out sometimes in certain organizations. So you can imagine if, like, Airbnb had been invented by someone who works at the Hilton. Right, and they'll be pitching to their bosses. What will happen is people will start to rent other people's rooms in other people's houses. Like, the Hilton were never going to invest in that idea.
Right.
Or if somebody in a Hilton Innovation Lab came up with Airbnb and then Airbnb became successful, the Hilton wouldn't know what to do with it. That would have been a nightmare for them. And so it is not that companies don't care about innovation. It is just that as you're doing that, you really have to get alignment to ensure that, what you're working on is going to have some chance of succeeding, not just outside in the market, but also with the support and the resources of the company that you're working for.
With that, do you find that it's a vision statement? It's a mandate coming from way up top that's saying this is who we want to be in the next X amount of years? Is that where it starts? Is it a groundswell? Where do you see it becoming the most sticky when it starts?
Yeah, so that's what's interesting because, so far the conversation we've been having is about how innovators should align to their main organization and align to their leadership. And then the opposite question is, well, what is the leadership's role in all this, right? Because if we're kind of coaching the teams to align to them, those teams need something meaningful to be aligned to, right? And so part of the work that I do, which is kind of the other half of my hat, is to work with leadership to develop something that I call an innovation thesis. And so if you think about venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, they'll be getting startup pitches from every single startup that needs money, right? And they need some sort of framework of deciding which kind of startup they invest in versus which startup they don't invest in. And so a lot of venture capital firms have what they call an investment thesis, which kind of defines their vision of the future and how they think that startups are going to transform the future. And then they use that to define what kind of startups they want to invest in. And so I often work with leadership again to kind of have a conversation about, and with leaders, it's really important to kind of benchmark where the company is now. So do some sort of portfolio analysis, analyze exactly what products we have, what products are struggling, et cetera. And then another one is like, what's happening in the world around us? Where's the world going? And then after that, we can have a conversation about, what are the trends that we're seeing that might impact our business? What kind of future do we see our company sort of, becoming? And from that, we can develop like an innovation thesis or like an innovation strategy that then says, we think we're here today. We think the world is going this way, and this is how we're going to use innovation to respond. So we would like to invest in ideas that test these and these and these and these and these assumptions about the future. And then that thesis becomes the guideline for making investment decisions in innovation projects. I think that it's important for innovators to always know that what they're working on matters to also not just the innovation lab, but the company itself as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And so you talk about, sometimes it's a guerrilla movement, right? And there's people doing things. And one of the things you talk about is making sure that you have that executive buy-in. And so going back to what we were talking about earlier, is it just figuring out what sort of nomenclature the executive will buy into? Is it like, where do you start if you want to start that? And again, I'm using the term loosely here, but if let's say you're a product owner in the organization, you've got ideas and you think maybe an innovation lab or something along those lines is important. Where do you start? How do you start getting that buy-in? How do you start having those conversations in a productive way?
So what's interesting is that like the option of the guerrilla movement is an option that you choose when you've made the decision that you cannot change your company.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing to kind of sets the context there. You say we're never going to be able to get an innovation thesis done in here. Our organization is never going to develop an innovation strategy. But I'm really passionate about this industry. I'm passionate about this company. I would like to make a contribution to this company. So what we're going to do as innovators is we're going to create an underground movement, a guerrilla movement, and we're going to innovate. And the first choice you have to make there is you want to lower the cost of innovation, but you don't want to rise to the surface too quickly. Mm-hmm. You want to nurse and protect the idea that you're working on. And then the second thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you have some sort of ambassador, some sort of representative, a well-connected leader within your company who gets it. Because then they serve the role of navigating the corporate politics for you, removing roadblocks, dealing with other leaders, and ensuring that you get the cover that you need in order to be able to work on what you're working on. And so that in every company that I've been in, I've never been in, think of the most traditional company you can imagine. I don't know, apps or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. There's always 2 or 3 leaders that are on the cutting edge that get it, that read the Lean Startup, that read Business Model Design, that go to all the conferences, that are really keen to get this stuff done, but they can't get it done just because of the context of the organization that they're working in. Every single organization on the planet has that lead in it, the maverick. And it's really about aligning yourself to that leader and then working with them to make sure that at least you get some support as you're navigating and working on your innovation project.
And so let's talk about balance then. So there's times where innovation labs, they'll throw out everything and start from scratch, and they ignore a lot about the organization that got them to the place in order to even have the innovation lab. And so if you're coaching an innovation lab or leaders within an innovation lab, or even just the people on the ground floor, how do you also show not only respect for the processes and things that you did before to get to this point, but also show that there's some value in those things as part of your new processes and your new pitches?
There's 2 things I like to do. I like to distinguish the portfolio as separate from the management process. And so I think that every large organization should have a balanced portfolio of products and services. So you can have core innovation where you're incrementally improving your current core products. You can have adjacent innovation where you're working on adjacencies, maybe taking your current products to new markets, maybe adding value to those current products for current customers. And then, of course, there's transformation innovation where you're working on new products for new customers and new markets that you haven't played in, which is the hard part. And I think that innovation labs are probably best suited to deal with those kind of crazy situations. And so the fundamental question for people leading an innovation lab is, are you contributing to the balance of the portfolio in your organization? Because if you are, that shows that you have a respect for what the organization has already accomplished, and you're helping it kind of keep growing and scaling and getting better at that, right? And then second to that, you can then start working on crazy plays into the future, mm-hmm. and ensuring those are aligned to the growth strategy of the company.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears for just a second, because one other thing I've heard you say before, and this is where I feel like you and I are kindred spirits, is that you mentioned you spend a lot of time as part of your job arguing with middle management. And I can also feel the same. The work that I do as well is a lot with transformation within organizations, especially around digital. So let's talk about how you start broaching those conversations, because obviously it's not usually a middle manager that's saying, get Tendayi in here, we need some innovation and all that. You're usually being placed, I would imagine, by somebody in a more senior leadership to go in and now work with these folks and let me know how it goes. Yes. What are some of those first conversations you have to kind of introduce yourself and what your goals are? And how do you, like you were saying, you're kind of managing stakeholders that are people that you need to, you haven't worked there for 30 years like some of these folks have, and now you have to come in and tell them how to work differently. Where do you start? How have you been successful there?
So I have